tried in absentia, found guilty, and if ever they go back to Italy, they have life imprisonment. I picked up the paper then, I see it, and I just couldn't believe it. We've never really talked about did he do it, didn't he do it, because judge not lest you be judged, you know. There's no way that we could, and that's what happened with Aldo Riccardi and Carlo Dolce. And on the comic side, many of you people remember Frank Gallardo, the judge. Well, during the war, the OSS had need of his services, and they called him to come in, whether it was legal. I had no idea what it was all about. I had just returned from my mission, and I was being prepared for briefing, and they told me to sit at this desk and prepare my report. I'm sitting there, and I see these orders, incoming orders, and I see Frank Gallardo's name there. It's Frank Gallardo. I said, gee, that's the fellow I know from Limerick, my family's lawyer. At that time, he was our family's lawyer. Well, what's that all about? I said, well, he's coming in a few hours. I said, well, I'm going to be briefing over here with the officers, and when he comes in, let me know, because I'd like to see him. I want to see if it's the same person that I know. And sure enough, he comes in. He loved to tell this story. So I says, Frank, how are you? You know why I'm here? Not really, no. But after the war, he's telling everybody, so here I am. They call me to go into the OSS, very secretive. And I don't know what it's all about, what they're doing, and I'm all excited about it. And this kid from Limerick, hey Frank, how are you? He used to love to tell that story. He had great times.
You know, when you were talking about being someplace for 5 weeks and staying 5 months.
Right.
My husband went in ROTC at Cornell, so he was just waiting to be called, and he went in May of '41. So he was stationed at Mitchell, which was, you know, just great. We just loved that. And then he was transferred to North Carolina, and we were supposed to get married in February of '42. So he calls from North Carolina. He said, could you come down? Maybe we could get married. I have to go overseas. So he said, but it's only 3 months. I can't tell you what it's all about. I'll be back in 3 months. I said, well, then, you know, we'll get married when you come back. 32 months later. So, but at any rate, he had been sent on a mission, 10 of them, to go over and see just what we didn't have in Australia in the way of aircraft. And I guess there was a lot less than we thought. So they were over there the 3 months doing this investigation. And this Colonel Doyle was in charge, of course, an arrogant son of a gun. And when the investigation was finished, Doyle went home and left the other 9 in Australia without an assignment. So they were just hanging around. And eventually, his friend Stan Gottschalk, who was an attorney, later became his partner. He was assigned to intelligence with General MacArthur, and my husband was an inspector general with General Kenny. And this we always kidded him about. I just think it's kind of cute. It tells about the duties, I think, of an inspector general, or what you have to do to be an inspector general. And well, at any rate, one of the things it says is that it's more secret than the OSS and all of this sort of thing, and that you have to be purer than a chaplain. So then he was in New Guinea after the Australian tour for a long, long time, and he did investigations for all of the services. Some of them were very interesting. I don't know whether you remember about a bomber crashing in a place called Hidden Valley in New Guinea. And it was a group of people in their spare time had taken this bomber up and crashed. And the very, very high mountains in the area. And they had to get a glider to get the men out. And they found this civilization down there with 7-foot natives with all sorts of irrigation, a very highly civilized valley that nobody had ever gotten out of.
Shangri-La?
It sounds like it, doesn't it? And then he said that in New Guinea they'd go swimming in Lady Gulf, and they'd see the Japanese coming to strafe them, and they would have to have all these unusual code words at night, like Lollapalooza, because obviously Japanese could not say Lollapalooza. And they would go out in the morning, and there would be dead Japanese on the beaches when they went out in the morning. And then he wound up in Philippines. So when he came home, he called me from Seattle, and he said, I should be home in a week or 10 days, and I'll be at Fort Dix, and you can come over to Fort Dix and pick me up. We were mother and father, of course. So I get a call within 4 or 5 days, and he said, I'm here. And I said, oh, at Dix? He said, no, I'm in Penn Station. Now, I was working for an accountant. He said, look, whenever you want your vacation, you know, you can take it. Well, I just, flew out of the office. I got in the subway, And then when I got to Penn Station, I started thinking, I haven't seen him for 32 months. I wonder if I still want to marry him after about 2,000 letters, you know. And so I kind of slowed the pace a little bit, and he's standing there, and it was exactly the same. We got on the train, and there was this unusual odor, and I thought it was something from the Long Island Railroad. So I was working Friday. He came in after work to take me to see Song of Norway. And we're sitting in the theater, and gee, that unusual odor is still here. I wonder what it is. So he said to me over the weekend, have you noticed an unusual odor? I said, well, yes, I have. He said, yeah, my mother noticed it too. He said, the laundress in the Philippines would wash their clothes in the Pasig River, and then she would make starch, and she would keep using the same starch until it was gone. So she was starching their clothes with this starch that had this terrible, I guess they were so used to it that they didn't even smell it, you know. But a lot of different things.
Talking about nostalgic moments, I have one I'd like to share with you. I mean, for me, probably the biggest thrill I ever had in my life. Sterling Hayden was in our outfit. He was a Yugoslav. He was in charge of the Yugoslav group, and their base was in Bari, Italy. And this fellow Pat Grasha and I were going from Brindisi to Naples, and we had a layover in Bari for the night. And we got there. Sterling was about 1 in the morning, and Sterling Hayden told us which room to go to sleep in, and we did. The morning came, and I hear this rustling in the room, and I look up. I see this gorgeous blonde bringing us breakfast in bed. Comes up to the bed, is Madeline Carroll. She was married to Sterling Hayden at that time. So he says, give those kids something to write home about, bring them breakfast in bed. So that was really a thrill. Douglas Fairbanks Jr., he was the greatest guy you ever wanted to meet. He didn't want any, they kept throwing medals at him. He brought in a group, I wasn't in this mission, but he was in charge of the PT boats. He brought a group in and dropped them off, and they blew 3 bridges. He got the Bronze Star for bringing them in, and the Oak Leaf Cluster for picking them up, and the guys that blew 2 bridges in the tunnel got nothing. But he would never, you know, he hated that. He was great. We had so much fun with him. A lot of memories.
Okay, does anyone have any questions, or would you like to share some of your own experiences in the back?
I was wondering, living on the South Shore, as Helen or anyone else is on it, with the restrictions, the blackouts at night, and say going to Jones Beach or Long Beach or Atlantic Beach during summer, was there when dusk?
Well, my wife Rose had a dental appointment with Dr. Ziegler, Dick Ziegler. She was in the middle of drilling when the air raid sirens came, and he didn't turn his lights out, and the wardens kept hollering at him. And
The least little bit under a shade.
Yeah, and she was in there getting drilled away. You know, Ziegler's around the corner from Dick Ziegler, and they were very strict from what Rose told me. That wasn't
That
it.
went to Malverne too? I mean,
Yeah, sure. It was right here in Malverne.
Brooklyn?
Manhattan.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
When I heard about this program, I thought about a few things, and maybe I can share them with you here tonight. Because I was about 7, 8 years old when the war began, so I have a different perspective than people that were in the service at that time. And the way the war was depicted to kids at that time was we had some choice villains. We had Mussolini, we had Hitler, we had Tojo, and Hirohito. And we were all fired up to hate these particular individuals. And I recall that I went to school 13, that's Wheeler Avenue School. That was the only school in school 13 at that time. But we'd have assemblies like twice a week. And part of the assemblies would be they'd have music, portrayed music slides up on the screen in the auditorium, and we learned patriotic songs, and we learned the Air Force song and the Marine hymn and Anchors Away and so forth, and Whistle While You Work, Hitler is a Jerk, and like that. Let's Remember Pearl Harbor, and a lot of things of that nature. The fervor and the attitude of the people at that time was so so intensely patriotic, and you know, with such a contrast to what we saw, for example, in the Vietnam War, and where there was just total apathy and a letdown and lack of support for people that were fighting. But as kids, we were induced to be all fired up, and it was there was a common enemy that we all were educated to be against, and there was so much going on. The things we did as kids is we naturally played war games, and everybody had guns, and big items were helmets and belts and things like that. And at one point in time, before the war, you played with metal trucks and guns and so forth, and when the war came, you had guns that were made out of sawdust and glue and other materials that were not war necessary. I recall also we learned about identifying aircraft when Mr. Landers, Joe mentioned that. We learned about B-24s being the Liberators and B-25 being the Mitchell bomber and the B-39 being the Bell Arakova and the Hellcats and the Wildcats and the P-47s being Thunderbirds. I'm surprised that I remember these things, but you know, they're so well rooted in you when you're a child, you just don't forget. And I recall someone mentioned the scrap drive earlier. I think it was Keith. At that time, the veterans groups, and I remember specifically Al Quintano and other members of VFW and members of the Legion would get together and organize and run the scrap drive. We collected newspapers, which were bundled and put out, and we always collected on Sunday morning. The village garbage trucks were open trucks at that time with wooden sides like farm vehicles. That it was really a flatbed truck with wooden sides that you stuck in. And on the Sunday, we'd go out and collect the newspapers. And they would hire, well, they wouldn't hire, but they would, kids my age and a little bit older, we'd go out, and the older kids would be on the ground because they could throw the bundles of paper out, and the younger kids would ride the truck and have to stack them. And we'd work for maybe 3 or 4 hours, and we'd start out around the police station, which is where Tom Driscoll Fountain is now, and we'd work for 3 or 4 hours, and when the morning was over, you'd get a buck or something like that. And that was, I don't know if Ed ever did any of that, but I did quite a bit of that. We all collected fats and tin
Bacon
cans,
fat.
you took them to your butcher.
Yeah.
I don't remember if you got money or whether you got a token for buying meat or something, because everything was rationed at the time. I remember red stamps and blue stamps. I think red was meat, blue was probably for butter or canned goods and things of that nature, and gasoline was rationed. And you were lucky if you had a friend that worked in the defense industry because they got extra gas coupons for going back and forth to the plant. And occasionally, if they'd have an extra one, they'd give you an extra stamp, so you got an extra gallon of gas or something for the family car. And I remember the air raids. At that time, there was a shortage, as Frank mentioned, of rubber and leather for repairing shoes. And my father, of course, was a shoemaker, shoe repairman in Malverne. And because you couldn't buy shoes, there was this tremendous pressure. Everyone had to have shoes repaired. And my father would be working from 6:30, 7 in the morning till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And sometimes I'd bring him supper in a little can, like he used to go to the bar and get beer years ago with a can. Well, I used to bring pasta to my father in the store. But if he didn't eat in the store, he'd come home late, 9, 10 o'clock, and that's usually when they had the air raid drill. So my father'd be home eating, and the air raid sirens would go off. We'd pull the shades down, And the wardens would still come and rap on the windows, and we'd have to turn off the lights, and we'd have to eat in the dark. It was things like that. Also, I remember automobiles, we painted the upper part of the headlights
Yes,
black,
black.
so that it wouldn't project any
Mhm.
light towards the sky, because we had no idea at that point whether we would be susceptible to air raid warnings or anything. I mean, we were all new at this stuff. No one had any experience. We didn't know what type of aircraft would be developed, whether we would have enemies flying across the Atlantic or whatever. But these were some of the things that we were...
Retreaded tires.
Pardon me?
The retreaded tires.
Retreaded tires, right. Oh, rubber heels. During the war, the material got crummy, and all your rubber heels marked the floors. And that was the big plague for the housewife and mother, because all the floors would end up being black from the cheap rubber that was being sold. And I remember my father had some pre-war rubber heels that he just happened to have in stock when the war started, and these you would dole out for dress shoes, but anyone came in with working shoes got the new rubber heels which marked the floors, and someone who came in with a dress shoe got a better rubber heel. And many times the brown rubber heels, because they came in colors, black and brown, the brown rubber heels marked the floor less than the black ones did. So sometimes you put the brown heels on the black shoes and you dye them, all in the interest of, avoiding flack from the housewife, because we would catch the flack in the store, my father would. On the scrap drives, getting back to that, there was a tremendous one-time metal drive. There were many drives, but there was one big drive, and that's when the tank disappeared. The tank, the configuration around the park was different than it is now. I don't remember exactly how it is. I'd have to sit down and try to figure it out. But right about where that little driveway is, it comes out by the end of the Ann stores, by the point. That was all filled in at the time. There was grass there, and there was a concrete slab, and that's where the tank was, the World War I tank. And we would many times break the lock that held down the cover on the canopy, break it with a brick or a stone or something like that, and play in the tank. Until the police found out about it, and they'd come and slap another lock on it. So that would be on for a couple of weeks or a month or whatever. But they had this tremendous rally and scrap drive, and they had chicken wire, which they supported with wooden posts. They must have been like 10, 16 foot, and they made a complete enclosure around the tank. And people came and threw the pots and the pans and many other things, heavier metal items, and completely covered over the tank. And then a couple days later, they came and hauled away all the pots and the pans, and they took the tank with it. And we were all very disappointed as kids, because that was a famous play place. We all had to save tin cans. You cut out the tops and the bottoms, and you laid them on the side, and you stomped on them, and you put them in cardboard boxes, and you took them somewhere, I don't know where. And the newspapers, the fat, I remember the rationing, that you did not get enough of what you wanted in the way of meat or certain other commodities, because everything was going to the service. Butter was hard to get, sugar was hard to get. Well, I didn't smoke at the time. I never have. But you're right, cigarettes and certain other things of that nature were in very, very short supply. But, I have a different perspective on World War II, having been a youngster and going through it. And every day I'd go to my father's store, and you'd open up I'd open Daily News, and they'd have a picture of Europe and the Pacific, and the battle lines were drawn every day. You'd see how far the armies progressed, and where we lost ground, and where we gained ground, and a particular raid to a city in Europe or whatever, and it was just a very emotional time in everyone's lives, and very memorable for kids. because we were all so impressionable and had never encountered anything of that nature. And you know, a lot of these memories, in spite of the fact it's 50 years or so, are very vivid in my own mind. And just thought I'd throw it out from the point of view of a child.
You mentioned Al Quintano, you know, he was so very active in so many things. He had a large team of people. I don't know where he got all his addresses, but they would all write letters to all his, they didn't know who they were, just kept writing hundreds and hundreds of letters to the servicemen and became pen pals.
Ed, of course.
Yeah, so Joe was saying, we all hated Hitler and Tojo, and I was from this side of town, he was from the other side, but one thing that was very important, in school, they made you very patriotic. They knew you could never afford savings bonds, but once a week you had to bring your 10 cents in for your little 10-cent stamp.
Yeah.
And
War
those little
stamp.
Liberty stamps, whatever they were, put them in a book.
Really?
You have a
You
book.
got $1 worth
Yeah.
or $2
Yeah.
worth, and when everybody did this, it built up. And Victory Gardens, as you mentioned before, I can remember on the corner of Hanson and Johnson, there was a lot there, and it divided it up into 6 Victory Gardens. We were down there all the time, and I never heard of Swiss chard before. We had Swiss chard, beef, everything. All during, you never bought the food.
No.
And you did get money for the fact, because that was my job. I brought it up to Reichels up here, and I get the 2 or 3 cents a pound. And it was different. At nighttime, you'd listen to Mickey and Molly, or the Phantom, or
Eddie, you talked about the Victory Gardens. You remember Scranton and Union Avenue over there, where we had our stores, Scranton and Union Avenue in Limerick?
yeah.
Well, behind it, there's about an acre and a half of land there. There's 4 houses there now,
Yeah,
but that was,
yeah.
my mother had that whole thing as a Victory Garden. And we used to bury the leather and the rubber back there to make compost for the garden. So a comical thing, my nephew was a Limerick policeman. Louis, you remember my nephew, Louis Arena?
Yeah.
May he rest in peace. And you remember Louis, yeah? He stops this guy in Garden City for speeding or whatever he was doing, and he looks at the address, says Scranton Avenue, he says, that sounds like it's behind those stores. Yes, it's the first new house behind the stores there. Oh yes, my grandmother and grandfather had a shoe repair shop there. Where you live used to be their farm. And we used to bury all the stuff in the yard there for the compost. Oh, thank God, you solved the mystery for me. Every time I dig in my yard, rubber heels come up. Where the hell are these rubber heels coming from? So they had a good laugh and he let him go. There wasn't a month that went by that somebody in Malverne would come to me and say, Frankie, you got a nice nephew. Used to let them all go. Who you heard they were from Malverne?
Frank, you mentioned about the soldiers that lived on Ocean End. The house is still there. It's a brick colonial. It's about the 3rd house from Church Street. And the installation that they had was a searchlight installation. And it was right around where the Village Hall is now. It was not up on Ocean Avenue. It was here, close to the rail. I would say right about where this building is located now. And they had dug a hole, and they had a searchlight. It was a carbon arc searchlight, and they had sandbags around it and a cover that went over it and so forth. And I think there must have been maybe 12 or 15 soldiers, Army fellows, that lived in that. And the installation was here for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they dismantled it when they realized we weren't going to be receiving visitors from overseas.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments or questions from back again?
My family moved into Malverne in 1969, and my childhood memory, I remember seeing flying boxcars that were stationed at Mitchell Field. I was wondering if anyone could speak to, like, during World War II, Mitchell Field, were you constantly aware of the comings and goings of the
Right.
aircraft?
So somebody just, the question was Mitchell Field very important during the war? Were you aware of planes or goings, comings and goings from there?
My husband was there for, quite a while, maybe 18 months. And while he was there, right in that area, they went on maneuvers, and they always left at midnight. And he and my mother-in-law and myself would go over to see him off. And I don't know why, you're in the middle of nowhere, but you had to whisper, And here everybody was whispering, and they get all the jeeps and the trucks and everything together to go on the maneuvers. I think we did that at least 2 or 3 times, but that's the area you're talking about, It was very eerie.
And of course, they have to remember too that houses weren't around here like they are
No.
now.
And lots between each house, practically.
And wide open pit in Long Beach, you could see from one end of the island to the other, from the channel right down to the ocean.
You know, at Mitchell Field, there were German prisoners of war during the Second World War. As I remember you driving over in that area, you would see German prisoners with, prison guards, and they were tending farms. There was a lot of planting farms growing food, and you'd see sentries with rifles and so forth. I remember that, seeing the prisoners in the vicinity of Mitchell Field.
We also had a beautiful officers club. Nice dances.
I think it's still
Okay, why don't we have one more comment from Joe? It's getting rather late. I think we could probably go another 2-3 hours. It was really interesting. Maybe we should follow up with a second program and have a couple more panelists up here, and maybe we'll do that. But why don't you make last comment, and then...
Okay. When Mr. Canzaneri was talking about all the different planes that he remembered, the one he left out was the P-38. And if you remember, the P-38 had twin fuselages and twin tails. And one thing that it brought to mind was this. We have an organization, Second Air Division organization, and surprisingly enough, I keep getting letters from people who are sons, grandsons, or widows, and they want to know if I was happened to be on a certain raid. In fact, right here I used as a bookmarker a letter from a guy from John R. Snopick in Granby, Maine. His father was a waist gunner who was killed on 20th of February 1944 that I happened to be on that mission. And I wrote to the guy and I told him what happened there as far as I could remember. But when I was over in England, I was approached by a young guy from Pennsylvania, Jim Norris. And he said to me, by any chance, Mr. Landers, were you on the raid to Frederickshaven? And I said, yes, I was. He said, do you remember anything about it? And I said, well, the peculiar part about it, Frederickshaven is about as far as we could go, the range of the B-24s. I said, and after being all the way down there, I was told that the P-38s would be down there for fighter cover. He said, but they were late, weren't they? I said, you know, I never thought about it, but now that you mention it, they showed up about 5 minutes after I expected them to. He says, yes, that's when his father got shot down on that Frederickshaven raid. Well, you know, I couldn't remember anybody getting shot down on that raid. When I came home, I looked up my record. I had a log of all my missions. And I didn't fly with the 392nd on that raid to Frederickshaven. I was with the 458 bomb group. And the Germans, what they would do, they would pick out a certain group all the time. And they would line up 5 fighters this way, 5 fighters this way, and they'd go after you. But they always went after one group. In my 458 that I flew to Frederickshaven, my record says it's a long milk run, and yet the 392nd, they got all the fighters, and they lost 12 airplanes that day out of about 24. And his father was one of the ones that was shot down over Frederickshaven. And yet, the thing that brought to mind was that P-38, and I couldn't believe that those airplanes could fly that distance and still be fighter covered and then come back. But that's all I wanted to tell you. You left them out.
All right, just before Peggy Europe's going to come up for a moment and do a presentation, just before we do that, first of all, I'd like to thank you all. This was really wonderful. What we will do is we'll keep some of this out for you to come up and look. Remember, this stuff is very personal to them. Be very careful with, especially with this newspaper that Joe just has donated to the Historical Society. Just try not to pick it up. Just look at it. But you're welcome to come, take a look at our own albums and look up if any people you'd like to look up.
Lemonade for me.
Peggy?
I think you're right.
And I think we also have some refreshments after
This
this
whole
too.
yang
Right.
they've got here.
Should we
Yeah,
have
that was,
stand
All right, why don't the three of you come on over here?
over here? I'm going to take a moment to do a presentation. It was a wonderful program, and on behalf of the Historical Society, I would like to present to all of you, each of you, a certificate, and I'll read it first. The Malverne Historical and Preservation Society presents this certificate to Joseph Landers, to Helen Driscoll, and to Frank Zabatta in appreciation of your efforts to further the aims and ideals of the Society. And my husband and I, as co-presidents, signed it, and it's dated tonight. And I'd like to thank you very much.